And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about why it is so difficult to find a good watchmaker. But first, I'd like to thank you for being with me to the 10,000 subscriber mark. We just hit it, so I really do want to say thank you so much for being here, and also thank you for liking and subscribing if you haven't already, because it does help me make videos for you and the future, and leave in the comments below things that you'd like to see in the future, because I do go through them and I do communicate with you in that way. Also, Instagram, The Real John P. I want to talk about my wrist first because there's a very cool vintage gilt dial Eterna military watch. It has the coolest look to it. We've had it for a while at delraywatch.com, and we've recently put it up for auction on eBay. So this is going to be going pretty cheap. Probably take a loss on this, but it's okay. I want to share this with you. It's a very cool, and for a while these were pretty desirable, which is why we're pretty shocked we have it. But it's a gorgeous watch, and it's at auction, and usually auctions on eBay mean good deals. So feel free to check that out as well. So let's talk about this topic, watchmakers. You can find them, right? They're working for brands, they're working for pre-owned dealers like ourselves, Delray Watch, and they're also hanging up signs in malls, kiosks, and at jewelry stores around the world and country. But for some people, why is it so difficult to find a good watchmaker? Now, we'll first talk about the different places that watchmakers can work, because I really do believe, in our experience here with having a service center and talking with different watchmakers and prospective watchmakers, there's just a different mentality in the types of watchmakers that exist. So first we have the classically trained watchmakers. Now there are some watchmaking schools. There's a watchmaking school in Miami. There's watchmaking schools that are funded by the brands, including that one. And there are watchmaking schools that are put on wholly by the brands themselves across the world. The interesting thing is that most watchmakers that become watchmakers today, in our experience here, are actually going through the schools that are funded by the brand. So someone will go, for example, to the watchmaking school in Miami that is largely funded by Swatch. They'll go through there and they'll immediately get a job, perhaps servicing base movements for Omega or some of the other Swatch brands. The same can be said at some of the watchmaking schools in Europe. And so for someone that wants to get into watchmaking, they can go to these schools oftentimes at no cost to them, because there's a shortage of good watchmakers, dedicated watchmakers, that these schools are provided almost entirely for free in modern times. Going back in time, to give Hans, one of our watchmakers here, we have two now, but he's one of our watchmakers. He's been on some other episodes. To use him as an example, he is also Swiss classically trained. He's a Swiss classically trained watchmaker, but he actually had to pay for his schooling many, many years back. There was a point in time where watchmaking was as prestigious in parts of Europe as perhaps even a lawyer. His specific watchmaking school he went to, he had told us that was actually more than law school. He was deciding in a point in time whether or not he would go to law school or become a watchmaker, and he found that watchmaking was a little more interesting for him at that point in time. So he actually dedicated and invested more in watchmaking school. So times have changed a little bit. But that is the one type of watchmaker, is a watchmaker that goes through these schools and then they work for the brands. Now, there's another type of watchmaker, and it's the watchmaker that's usually self-taught or self-enterprising. So there's a type of watchmaker that you often see in malls or in local mom and pop jewelry stores sometimes, or on the side of the road. We fix watches, battery changes here. Now, I don't want to say that all of those shops or self-employed watchmakers are bad, because it's just not the case, right? If you do something long enough and you're dedicated, you can get pretty good at it, right? It's just how becoming a professional works. But when we talk about difficult repairs, or perhaps repairs that require some machining of some parts, working on some complications, working on some movements that are not common, some in-house movements, you really have to understand the mechanics and the design and the architecture behind the watch movements. And when you go to watchmaking school, they teach you a lot of these things, and they have you work on some movements that are more complicated, so you can kind of take the fundamentals of things you've learned and transpose them on different types of watches. Now, if you teach yourself watchmaking, or perhaps you're an apprentice and you're learning from someone else that taught themselves watchmaking, and you see that a lot here in Miami through different places like in the jewelry district, or perhaps on 47th Street in New York City, or the Jewelry Tower in Los Angeles, they can fix a lot of movements. They handle a lot of Rolex, so they've had a lot of practice on Rolex-based movements. They've handled a lot of base ETA movements, so they can handle a lot of base ETA movements. But if you walked in and you say, hey, my Dornbluth and Son is having some timing issues, I think the amplitude is low, they're probably going to say, I'm sorry, I don't work on that. Or if they take it in, they're going to somehow manipulate that movement to just test higher and move on to the next customer. Now, that's not always the case, once again, but with talking with different watchmakers, and before we added the second watchmaker here to Delray Watch, we were going through a lot of watchmakers that were available, which is, not that many, honestly, compared to other positions. By the way, because the brands are sucking up all the best watchmakers, retraining them because of the way that the Swiss watch market is absolutely taking off, and there's that many more pieces floating around for repair, service, warranty claims. There's just not a lot of good talent out there. Most of the time, if you're a watchmaker and you're really good and you can service some high-end complications and you're dedicated, skilled with the hands, the big brands are going to pull you in and you're going to make six figures, no problem. Many brands for a senior watchmaker could make well over 120,000. And so for someone that went to a free school, that can be a very attractive thing and a very rewarding experience as well, because a lot of the brands have a very attractive company policy in terms of vacations and perks and benefits. And, that's a good thing for many people. Though when you see some of the gents that'll start repairing watches, it's often financially driven. They want to quickly repair a watch and get it out and collect their cash and move on. Whereas when you're looking at classically trained working for the brands, they're not financially driven. They've got a salary and they do as the brands instruct, and the brands instruct quality often or most times. They don't want to be taking a watch in over and over again. They can't just tell you no. That's very bad luxury brand image. Whereas, you could get into a bit of a discrepancy with a guy that hangs a sign out on his door, and, what is the recourse? Maybe you look for a Google review and leave him a bad review on his page if he has a Google business page, and if he doesn't, then you have to sign him up for one to leave a bad review, and, that's not something you want to do. So there's really those two main trails of watchmakers, and, you can choose which one you want, but I would say that most of the time I would steer into the professional. Now, where can you find a professional watchmaker? Of course, I'm going to be a bit biased. We do handle services here, but I'd say it's a very small fraction of what we do here at Delray. But I'll notice that there's kind of a third class of watchmaker, and it's actually the classification of both of our watchmakers we have here is there are retirees that work for the big brands, and then they just they've saved up. A lot of watchmakers are frugal. They've saved up. They've retired, and they just want to keep working on watches, keep staying technical. A lot of them really have a passion for it, and they like solving problems. So you have, for example, you have Hans, who's, pretty much retired, and he just wants to service a handful, select few of watches, and they hold the same standards as the brands. And so this kind of, and we're noticing more of these guys out there. So if you can find one of those guys, it's a very excellent choice over the guy at a kiosk at a mall, because they have the same processes and procedures that the brands demand and hold to spec. If you had a Mercedes car and you took it to a guy that, is working on a Toyota, is he going to know what the manufacturer wants? Maybe he can look it up, but will he? It's a toss-up. And so if you can't get into the manufacturer, or perhaps you'd like a little bit better of a bargain, find the guy that knows the processes, procedures, where to get the parts. And if it's something that's difficult or complicated, some of these guys, including Hans and our second watchmaker we recently added, which has worked for some brands like Dornbluth and Son, actually producing parts, that's excellent as well, because sometimes you just have to make parts. And so if you're looking for a watchmaker, I always recommend to look for someone that's classically trained. And if you cannot find a good watchmaker, it means that you probably either didn't look, because, that's possible, or perhaps you just went to one of these guys and they butchered your watch. And we do, unfortunately, see some of these cases here that we have to correct. And once again, this topic was suggested by someone that went through this scenario with a specific watch. And once again, sorry for the cough and the cold here. It's been raining nonstop in Miami, lots of thunderstorms for the last few weeks. So I hope by the next video I can be totally clear and clean and have a good voice for you. And once again, thank you so much for liking and subscribing. It got me to this 10,000 point, and I really do appreciate it. And I hope to be making many more videos in the years to come. Thanks, guys. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.